everybody. My name's Nina Crowley. I'm SICA's Professional Affiliations and Education Manager, and I'm here today with Dr. Emily Dhurandhar, who has 10 years working in academia at Texas Tech. She has recently co-founded a health tech startup called Obthera, and as Chief Scientific Officer, she's digitized an evidence-based dietary weight loss program offered in India commercially and in the US at various institutions. And she and I have been in the obesity care space for a long time and recently connected after I read an article she wrote about menopause and weight gain. And I thought this would be a really good topic to talk about on here about menopause and body changes and wherever we go from there. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure.
Right. Yeah, so I think this is a really important conversation, not just personally, because we have many women in the weight management space, but for our patients and people who struggle with obesity and maybe not even struggle and maybe get to the point of menopause until they struggle. So I thought this was something that applies to a pretty large audience. And I wanted to kind of thinking back to your article, I wanted to sort of set the stage with maybe having you talk to me a little bit about how hormone replacement works and what the impact on obesity or adiposity is, and kind of in that general sense, and kind of get into the details after that.
Sure. Yeah. So hormone replacement therapy, it is kind of coming back actually as an option to manage menopause and related symptoms, including weight gain. And it for a while, it was a little bit, more risky because there were some studies coming out showing that it might increase the risk of cardiac disease and heart attacks. And so from there, people have really proceeded with caution. But I would say that it's a therapy that is still, I think, has a lot of benefits for some people, and it is still being studied. And it is something that, it's out there and it is an option definitely to consider. And so when it comes to the latest research on it is found that it can be cardioprotective. So it can kind of restore some of the cardiovascular function that's usually lost with menopause. And it also, it hasn't been shown to, on its own, cause weight loss, but it has been shown to help redistribute body fat again. So a lot of women notice that when they go through menopause, they get weight gain in the central and the belly area. And so it can help to redistribute that fat back to the hips and the thighs and, that subcutaneous fat tissue in the arms. And that is much, that kind of redistribution is also protective for, again, heart health and insulin resistance and some of those other chronic diseases that start to be more prevalent after menopause for women.
Well, yeah, I think, people are always asking, how do they redistribute their body composition, and if there is a way to do that while doing some of these other things. And I'm assuming there's other benefits of hormone replacement therapy on, I'm sure, behaviorally, mental health. Is that something that you see a lot of too?
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of women experience, better sleep, fewer mood swings. And when it comes to, managing a healthy diet, fewer cravings. And so it can be helpful from a mental health perspective and just overall well-being as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think, so menopause is, do you have kind of a definition? Do we have parameters of when that's happening and what is the sort of criteria for that up front?
Yeah, so it actually, is basically that you stop producing estrogen in the body. And so what happens is, for some women, it happens over several years. And for some women, it happens very quickly and suddenly. And so there's a lot of variation from person to person. And people will, I guess the clinical marker that you have gone through menopause is that you no longer have mid-seas or monthly cycle, regular cycle. So that's kind of the clinical definition of menopause.
Okay. Yeah. So that you're not producing estrogen, and that was helpful for helping keep things in the way that they were normal before this time.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
So in women, but in women, estrogen plays a really large role in, helping our fat function as it should. And, fat is, now we recognize that it's actually its own metabolic organ. So it produces hormones and it helps to regulate our insulin sensitivity, our glucose metabolism, our inflammation. And so estrogen actually is produced in the fat tissue. And so when estrogen is no longer produced there, that changes how the fat even functions. So it becomes more pro-inflammatory. It becomes more likely to promote insulin resistance. And it actually becomes less effective at storing fat safely where it should be. So normally adipose tissue, it's keeping that fat away from all your other organs so that they can function well. And if estrogen isn't in the picture anymore, that subcutaneous fat isn't working like it's supposed to. And you kind of get this overflow of fat into other tissues, which again can exacerbate that insulin resistance. So it can end up in your liver and in your muscle, for example. And that's where you get that metabolic dysregulation. And a lot of women also, the androgen production also tends to decrease around the same time, but it doesn't happen as fast. And so what can happen is that the androgen levels take maybe up to 10 years after you've experienced menopause to start decreasing. And so that balance between the estrogen and the androgens, it's no longer there. And the androgens take over. And so a lot of women experience that central adiposity, and that's related to that increase in androgen activity, since that estrogen is no longer there to balance it.
Okay. Well, that I have not ever heard such a perfect, eloquent description of it, but that makes total sense. So thank you for that. That was really great. And I think, so when you and I were talking, I think one of the things that was really interesting, and, I've always got this sort of behavioral lens on what I'm thinking about, and really just kind of coming to terms with the before and after, right? Like what maybe worked before. I know you work with a lot of women who have the disease of obesity, and maybe even maybe they didn't before, right? And they're coming to terms with what's happening during this phase, and those body changes, right? So like what of that sometimes is something we have to accept that's just happening, and what is something that's modifiable within their control. And I think one of the things you said that stuck with me is people really had for years had their program, had their, what worked for them, and all of a sudden it doesn't. So can you tell me a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So another thing that estrogen normally does that it no longer does after menopause is it helps to kind of regulate your appetite and even your energy expenditure, like how much energy your body burns, just to survive. And so that energy balance becomes much, much easier to tilt in a positive direction, right? Where you're going to be more prone to weight gain. And so, so what that means is that the normal, I guess, help you are getting from estrogen is no longer there. And so you do become more prone to weight gain after menopause. And so I like you said, I think the first step is just recognizing that and accepting that. And from there, there have been studies to show that, with some specific, attention to nutrition and diet, for example, that some of that weight gain can be managed or prevented. And the other really key aspect is going to be, of course, physical activity and making sure to try to maintain your muscle and your lean mass, because that's something that can also really go a long way, because as you age, you tend to lose that muscle mass just because of aging. And so that makes everything even harder. So if you can, leading up to menopause, have that active lifestyle, and then maybe after menopause, find some space in your life to even maybe kick it up a notch, that can go a long way. And then, if it's really causing some serious metabolic disturbances, like, insulin resistance, we have other tools in the toolbox now with weight loss medications, maybe surgical options if it really is suddenly, really affecting your health, so I would recommend that people talk with their doctor and see all the things that might be available to them for sure.
It's that double whammy, it sounds like, right? Where the adipose tissue is changing because of the estrogen going down, but then also that normal aging process where I think I've heard it said where every decade after 30, you're losing 3 to 8% of your lean mass. So we're kind of piling on, at the time when I think the other part for me that's interesting is this is a time when, women traditionally would have had children and are getting them maybe out of the house or changing their life in some sort of way where it's functionally different. Maybe the habits that you've had are changing. So it seems like, just a lot of changes all at once and accepting that stuff that really worked. I mean, that's a hard thing where this worked for you for some length of time and then all of a sudden we're changing the game.
Yeah. Yeah. It's you kind of expect that once you've got it down, it's always going to stay that way once you've got a good routine, health wise and having a healthier weight. But I think one of the things that is helpful to recognize is that if you have a tendency to gain weight, there's usually, sometimes it's environmental things that are piling on that contribute to that, but sometimes it is a physiological thing, and our bodies are subject to change. So it's interesting that a lot of people come to us, like us, for our program because we have a very more clinical, I guess, structured program. Because what they did before is no longer working. And so just understanding that your body will change. And the same thing that helped you with that healthy weight, 10, 20 years ago might not at all be the same as it is today. It might be a whole different game, because your body is changing, your environment, your circumstances are changing. Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear too, though, that, something like a structured program might not be the long term, but it definitely can offer a change up. I like the way, you're thinking about that. And that's, to me, nutrition it is subject to change, right? Like we don't have to have that be a static thing where it's always going to be the same way. So, to me, that also underscores that importance of having the resources, having a team of people that you can, reach out to or lean on during times where, things are changing and recognizing that out of your control piece is really hard for a lot of people.
Yes. Yes. And I think it's like, just as a reminder, as you're a child and your body is growing, you're an adolescent, your body is changing, you're going through puberty. Obviously your nutrition needs are going to be really different than when you're an adult, right? Where you're no longer growing, and you're kind of in a reproductive stable phase. But you think about it, menopause for women is a transition to the more elderly geriatric years. And so just like there was a big transition in nutrition from being a child to being an adult, there will be a transition also as you get into those geriatric years. That's very normal, and expected anyway. So yeah, it's definitely something to just be ready for and to anticipate, I think.
So yeah, so what kind of things do you do, or in your world, the medical weight loss component, for maybe this population specifically, or how do we adjust to those changing needs?
Yes. So one of the challenges is the fact that, you do need to just eat less food overall. And so a lot of the focus is on helping people make sure the foods that they are eating are very nutrient dense foods that are going to nourish their body, give them the protein they need, the fiber their colon needs, give them the micronutrients they need to fight infections and to stay healthy. And so it's about, when you have to eat a little bit less, what you do eat becomes more important. And so that's one kind of transition, helping people find those nutrient dense foods that they really love, their go-tos that, I could eat this for breakfast every day. It's great. That's what we try to do. And then I think another thing that can be helpful is introducing women maybe to, either reintroducing things they used to do and love, or helping them learn a new way of doing some kind of strength training or resistance training. I do think that, if that's not already a part of the regimen, introducing that can be helpful. There are a lot of really great classes for older adults that introduce you to, strength training, resistance training. I know for example, my parents in their neck of the woods up in Michigan, there's a terrific course at the Y that is specifically like 65 plus, where, they focus on maintaining lean mass and sometimes even growing the lean mass, the muscle that you have. So a little bit more of a focus on that. It becomes more of a priority, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that's one where it's hard to get people to make that shift. There's a lot of, prior thoughts about weightlifting or that they're going to bulk up. We hear that a lot of times. And now, in my world now working with body composition, it's very clear to me that that's something I need to work on as well. And in my, age category, but also just how hard it is to really, kind of not just preserve, but actually put on that muscle. And so do you see kind of the role of assessing or looking at body composition? Like, where would you, timeline wise, would you say, screening, regular checkups that include that, before and after starting any new medications, something like that?
Yeah, so I do see that. It's interesting you mentioned that, but a lot of women are getting regular bone density scans. And anyway, because around like perimenopause, that's another big impact of menopause is you start to lose bone density. And so, if you don't already have some regular bone density scans, that's one, kind of regular checkup that's probably happening anyway, where you could just just kind of keep it on your radar, be aware. But I would say that anytime, if you do decide, for example, to start hormone replacement therapy, it's always good to know if the thing you're trying is helping. And so in order to do that, you do want like a baseline and then some kind of reasonable, maybe monthly or every 3 months or so follow-up. You're just making sure you are seeing the improvement you're expecting. Because if not, then you want to try something else. And so if you're being, proactive and data informed, that's always going to help. Same thing, like if you're just starting resistance training, it could be really helpful. You might not want to, focus on seeing an increase in lean mass, but you at least want to see that it's holding steady, right? And then not decreasing. And so, yeah, I would say anytime you start something new with the purpose of maintaining your body composition and your metabolic health, it's good to get a baseline and then to have regular check-ins for sure.
Yeah, and I think that can be motivating too. And it's a different shift. So I think again, kind of the theme of what I'm hearing is things are different than they used to be. That's not necessarily a bad thing. We tend to put these into good and bad. It's just different. It's this gray area of we're aging. This is a different, phase in your life, and your goals may be different. So, even for people who have not worried about their weight per se before, and we're not encouraging worry about their weight, but maybe encouraging, okay, we are going to be monitoring your muscle mass through this transition, or we're going to be monitoring what's happening with that adipose tissue. I think that's important, even outside of the realm of, obesity, to really say this is that shift. Because then even as we get even older, then we kind of even look at that sarcopenia phase, right? Where you're looking at low muscle mass, but high adiposity, still maybe a high weight. And that's a whole nother, shift where you're seeing again, increase in adipose tissue, decrease in muscle mass. And so then that's a good point about, reconciling and dealing with that change and monitoring before, during, after to really get a sense of that.
I would call it, a perfect storm, sort of, this phase of life we're talking about. And so I think that with that being the case, I in some sense, I feel really bad to just like drop this on people because it is a lot to think about. But that doesn't make it, less true. And so I would rather you be prepared, right? I would rather you understand what's going to happen so that you can do your best with it and be proactive,
Yeah. I like that. Proactive. And also how you said like data informed, because that's part of this. We're not trying to have rose-colored glasses or not realize what's happening. We want to know this is something that can happen. And what can you do in your actual realm or your sphere of control?
Like you said, the goals might have to shift. And in some sense, I find that, with this age sense, a lot of times the body composition shift is so different that it can, instead of, hyper focusing on that, it can be really helpful instead to just focus on the goals being related to the behaviors that you're trying to do. And then just see what happens with the numbers. I think that the goal being related to the process and the behavior is a really great way to go, because it's just uncharted territory, and your expectations of the numbers and what the numbers are, there might be a mismatch there, and so that makes it even more important to focus on what you can control and to focus on the behaviors.
That's beautiful. Well said. I think behavioral goals is really what I'm always encouraging people to look at too, because even, any outcomes that we're looking at, there's not that direct correlation between what you have control over changing and what actually changes. And so, yes, if we're focusing on here's the things that you can do that will hopefully eventually be in the ballpark of some of these outcomes you're looking for, I think that's much more sustainable for the long term. Because what if they're doing and I know you've seen this too, you're doing everything moving in the direction that you want to go. You're making dietary changes, you're doing that strength training and whatever else that may be. What if you're doing all of that and those numbers don't move in that positive direction? I've seen people really kind of give up on some of those healthy, adaptive, amazing long-term behaviors because they were so focused on an outcome, and then they're abandoning that stuff, which is pushing them even farther away from where they want to be.
Yes, absolutely. Sometimes it's not about trading one behavior for another, but maybe tweaking the current behavior or adding one more thing to that, and that's when things, start moving. But yes, I agree that just dropping something, is sometimes will backfire. Most of the time, I think would backfire. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so if people want to connect with you after this or get involved with some of the work you're doing, or even, offer your program to folks they're working with, how can they stay connected?
So yeah, my LinkedIn profile is a great way to get me. I'm very active there. I always respond to messages there. I also write for obesity.net. And so if you kind of sign up for their community, I'm one of their health leaders. And so I write about topics like this in there. And then I also, if you're interested in any of our programs, like our commercial program, it's available at dhurandharclinic.com. So you can check it out there.
Some. Well, yeah, and I didn't know about obesity.net, so I'll have to join that and follow you there.
Okay. Yeah, it's a new community that has been started by Health Union. They have a lot of successful online communities for, rare diseases, for MS, and they've had actually a really great experience. And they're very specialized in building welcoming communities, which is what I really like about their approach. They have a very open, mindset, and everyone there is really supportive and friendly, and it's been really
great. Yes, more open, welcoming communities is definitely needed. So especially in this space. So I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. Well, great. Well, yeah. So I think lots of questions I have, some personal, but I think this was a really great kind of start to that. I'm going to make sure we link to your resources and the article kind of introducing the topic, but I'd love to talk with you again, even more in depth one of these days too.
Yeah, sure. That'd be great. I'd love that.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Nina.